And this is, I was waiting for the dog.
All right, I think we're back.
Hi, we're back. Welcome back to Tactical Edge Virtual Summit.
We have a special guest with Liz. So
yeah, no, he'll calm down in a second, but he's just excited to be back after lunch.
Well, welcome back, everyone. So we are just now we are getting ready with our next speaker, Elizabeth Wharton.
Or Wharton, as I call her.
Wharton.
Yes, Wharton.
Hi,
yes.
Liz, how are you?
Oh, sorry. Hello, I'm doing well. We have a guest presenter behind me that is not enjoying the beach scene as much. So yeah. I apologize as the guard dog tells us what he thinks about cyber.
Cyber, there you go. Fantastic.
I love your background. I wish to be in the beach, actually. It's very, very difficult these times, really.
We all wish that we were there. Before we begin again, Salma Osejo is our co-host from directly from Bogota, Colombia. So thank you for being here with us and making this, seem like really nice, very professional looking event here. I'm Ed Rojas, your other co-host, and I want to say thank you to our sponsors, to Ativo Networks, Cellpoint, Exabeam, and CyberArk for making this event possible. And thank you to all of you for being here, for attending here, and for visiting our sponsors' virtual rooms. Thelma, who do we have? Please make the presentations.
We are with Elizabeth. Liz, can I tell you, Liz?
Yeah.
Liz is
much easier.
Liz is Chief of Staff at SITE, where she serves as a strategic advisor for the CEO and leadership team, building and maintaining cross-department relationships, crafting external initiatives, and driving day-to-day projects and tasks. Well, welcome, Liz. Thank you for being here. And well, I want to know about Cartagena also. I think it told me you went to Cartagena last year also. So how was that experience in Cartagena?
Thanks to Ed's hospitality, I think we ate and danced our way across the beautiful city. I mean, just tried to soak in as much of the atmosphere, the beach, and just getting to know the people and the food. It was fantastic.
One of my favorite experiences or memories is that one night that we went back to the hotel, with that one hotel for the fantastic mojitos with that guy with the black glove, and there was a live salsa band there. It was amazing.
It was with the courtyard. So we were kind of under the stars.
Yeah. It was great memories. It's a good place to have a CISO summit. So all the CISOs watching this, if you're interested, this is open to all CISOs to come and join us. And next year, after COVID.
Exactly.
Hopefully next year after COVID in Cartagena, maybe, Ed, what do you think?
I think so.
Okay, great. At least, what is about your presentation today?
Well, so one of the challenges we have is really getting behind, think of Wizard of Oz. How do you get behind the curtain? How do you distill down through all the distractions and kind of flashing lights and noises to really what is going to impact your business risks and your security risks? So we're going to take a deeper dive into those rabbit holes and red herrings.
Wow,
perfect.
Sounds really interesting. So the stage is yours. Welcome again to Tactical Edge.
And good luck with the doggy helping you with the presentation.
Yeah.
Oh, did I? Yeah, I gave you.
There we go. So if y'all will bear with me as I get to our slideshow. And as I said, really the challenges filtering through the red herrings, the rabbit holes, to maximize resources, responses, and resiliency. So I'm Liz Wharton. I'm Chief of Staff at Scythe, and in a more recent role that I had, we're sitting there in the middle of a breach, and as we're juggling all these different interests, the vendors are coming in, and keep in mind, this was a ransomware attack, and truly all of our systems at that point, we didn't know where we stood. We thought of it as, okay, the world is burning around us. And we had these different vendors coming in trying to prioritize for us. And one of the things they would tell us is they say, okay, I know what you need to do. And we're going, great. We absolutely need some guidance. We need some help. He said, you need to get a pen test. And we're like, what? Like, yeah, you need to do quarterly pen tests. And as I'm watching, as leadership starts going, oh, maybe we do. I'm thinking, wow, that is not what we need, because spoiler alert, we know what's broken, all of it. Like we know there are holes. We know that there are issues. And it really resonated in the sense of, what do you do? How do you guide the resources? Because when you have a limited budget and you only have so much response, and how do you build back that resiliency? How do you get past, like what I call those red herrings? When you think of magic tricks, you think of the prestige, that there's that shiny, flashy object. Well, recently we had the Twitter breach that really, between the speculation, the innuendo, and quite frankly, the LULZ, those were the shiny objects. The first, immediate response is, it's a threat to democracy. It's awful. It's obviously nation state, because they're attacking these high profile accounts. They're doing all of these different things. Well, when we were able to take a step back, you realized that it really wasn't as sophisticated of an attack. You realize it really wasn't that in depth, and it didn't take spy level nation state. No, it was high school, teenagers who were able to use social engineering. So once you got past the distraction, and again, if you think of not only magic tricks, but you think of every time you watch a read Agatha Christie, or you watch a murder mystery, there's always that red herring. It's never the first individual. It's never the first clue. That it's always something else. And if you start to go down those rabbit holes, if you start to focus on the falsity, if you focus on, well, what could we have really done well with our security at Twitter? Like, what do we need to get this new flashy, shiny thing? And realizing, no, education, employee, that more basic level, you can avoid the fails. You can avoid the gate that is electronic, it's connected, it might be an IoT, you have security cameras, but if you can drive around the gate, what point does the gate serve? Because you have to learn how to avoid the red herrings, and I'm not talking about the fish. Instead, talking about those clues that are misleading, distracting, those issues that really don't impact your business or your company's threat model. And also avoid going down the rabbit holes, those nonsensical, something that's going to distract you, that's going to take away from the core threats that are facing you, because nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition, but at the same time, there are things you can do to narrow down. And in Alice in Wonderland, you have, no, said the queen, sentence first, verdict afterwards. And you kind of scratch your head and go, well, what was she talking about? What was happening? And it's the arbitrary nature of some of things that it looks like when we discuss, and as you've seen through some of the other talks, and if you've missed them, go back and watch them. But what do we mean when we start looking at, is it arbitrary? Is there a method to the madness? Are ransomware attacks, are the solutions truly just random? Well, no, because not all vulnerabilities are actually exploited. So when you have all of these different attacks and, oh, well, obviously threat actors are going to do this or threat actors are going to do that. Well, in Verizon's data breach report for this year, they noted that, again, not all exploits, not all vulnerabilities are actually exploited. Well, we know that. Okay. Well, when you look at the data and the information that leaked out, not all emails that are leaked are the same. You have certain email addresses that, and certain domains that are going to leak out more. And not all actors have the same motivation. That you, again, if you get distracted by the red herrings of and the rabbit holes of, oh, it's obviously an APT, it's obviously the Chinese, we need to focus our time, our energy into that. What you really start missing are, you hear, oh, it's internal actors. No, it's probably external. But what are their motivations? So how do you distill through all that? Because not only do you have to juggle all of those issues, but not all industries are impacted equally. And again, I'm pulling from the Verizon data breach report, and there's going to be a couple other reports that deal with both threat intelligence as well as, looking into the cost of data breach. I'll have links to all of these. So don't feel like you need to memorize, or, ooh, you see a thread you want to pull, or you see a red herring that you would like to kind of play with. Just because it's a rabbit hole doesn't mean it's not a fun exploration. I will have all of those resources available for you and in one central location that Ed will share out with Tactical Edge. So, but breaking it down, not every one of the industries that were looked at had the same issues. I mean, especially if you look at professional services, denial of service, that's where most of their incidents occurred. So if you're focusing without that additional information, if you're trying to focus your resources, your team, getting them to laser in, you don't necessarily want to fall down the point of sale rabbit hole or worry about some of those as much, because again, you've got to prioritize both the resources, time, as well as budget. And when you look at the actions, that not all industries, again, are impacted under the same actions. Was it malware? Was it physical? How did they get in? And not every industry, and this is, a little bit more of a breakdown, looking at financial and insurance industries. Well, they're going to have, in this case, Verizon noted that external threat actors, financial motivation, okay, but there were a few that were grudges, but it was a lot of personal information that was compromised, as well as credentials and things. But when we talk about manufacturing, for example, slightly different. You have the looking at, again, you still have those external threat actors, but you have more internal as well. The motives start shifting, but the data that's compromised, but also notice the other thing that starts shifting are, well, what to do? How do you, is it a security awareness training program? Is it the data protection? What are some of the solutions? And those especially start changing as well when you look at the healthcare industry and looking at, again, the threat actors, the motives. So how do we start crafting this, how do we start building through this? How do you distill this? And as a wise speaker, Wendy Nather, noted earlier this morning during her talk, the best threat intelligence is a story. So you filter through the noise to provide context. How do these threats, how do they apply? And what do they affect within your company? And threat intelligence is the easiest, best way to start crafting that story. How do you allocate your resources and build that out, and also have those conversations with buy-in from the rest of the management team, the rest of the company? Because once you have that full story, you have the resources, you can narrate the response, and you can build your resiliency. Because with a breach, with a vulnerability, and with an incident, it really isn't, they're going to happen. So do you have a plan to respond? And that was some of the tabletop exercises, as well as some of the other talks have talked about, how do you build out that response? How do you build out that resiliency? How quickly do you bounce back? And when we start talking about threat intelligence, there's a lot going on. You have the intelligence reports. You have, how are you bringing in the IR teams? How are you bringing in the different, you have all this information coming in. Are you prioritizing? Are you pulling in the asset management? And really, how are you taking that information to, again, distill it into actionable items for your industry? How do you avoid those, the business risk, and balance the security risk? How are you predicting? How are you responding? How are you preventing? And really asking yourself the question, I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is, what threat intelligence are you bringing in to your environment, and how are you utilizing it? Are you tailoring it to the different needs of your team, of really what you're looking at? And because, again, not all threats or data are equal, and not all returns on resource investments, be it the people, be it time and technology, are truly equal. And when we talk about not all data is equal, so when you're looking at, assessing all the different various information streams and information that you have, when IBM looked at the cost of a data breach for their 2020 report, they noted that 80% of customers' personally identifiable information, the PII, well, that's the most frequently compromised type of record, but also the costliest. So more so than the intellectual property, more so than the anonymized customer data, more so than corporate data and employee PII, is that customer information. So what threat intel feeds, how are you processing that information internally to protect and prioritize perhaps that customer PII based on the threat intelligence reports that you've received, based on the information that you're distilling? How have you focused on protecting that that's going to cost you the most? Because stolen or compromised credentials were the most expensive cause of malicious data breaches in 2019. So how are you protecting? Are you training the employees? Are you looking at that? And also looking at, with your threat intelligence and the information, who is most responsible for the breach and cybersecurity policy and technology decisions? Basically, who is focusing that energy? Who is driving the decisions and driving? So if you're in that CISO role, more often than not, one, you may not be the decision maker. So you may not be the one who is crafting all of these other policies. That's that in IBM's case, they found that the CEO, the CTO, those are having just as much of an impact, if not the VPs, the directors. But as the CISO, you're going to be blamed more often than not for the breach. So avoiding some of the rabbit holes and assessing the risks and balancing those risks, and also identifying the information that's coming in as a CISO or the chief security officer role, you do play a part. You have that vested interest in making sure that you're getting the buy-in, that you're getting the input from all the other decision makers before and doing it, because ultimately you'll be left holding the bag. So how do you build that threat intelligence buy-in? Because there are a lot of, if you look at the size of the threat intelligence market, and every vendor you can think of has all these different things, but you only have so much budget and you only have so much attention span, that everything can't be that red herring. Everything can't be the shiny, interesting object. So how do you build out that buy-in? How do you get the team to be on the same page and utilize and leverage these tools? From the internal resources, how do you get that aspect of it? How do you build out those requirements? These are our priorities. This is what we're looking for. This is the integration. And then how do you remove those obstacles? Because having the best laid plans and having, as we saw through some of the tabletop exercises, being able to have this beautiful gate doesn't work if everyone's just driving around it and ignoring it anyway. So how do you build that threat intelligence buy-in? And that do you have building out that formal dedicated team? Well, yes, there's been an industry shift into building out and having that formal dedicated team. But there's also a shift that's been seen. When we're talking about allocating threat intelligence resources, that recognizing that it needs to be one team, but also sharing that responsibility and pulling in from other internal groups, and also pulling in from external resources, leveraging. Again, you have this finite amount of time, you have these finite amount of resources. How can you maximize? How can you build that? And 61% of the respondents in the SANS 2020 CTI survey noted that they're having this combination of, or this increase in combining both the external as well as the internal resources. And that's one of the areas you'll see Scythe build in on, and that Scythe as a platform is designed to work and integrate in with a team, be it a red team, a blue team, create that purple team. So finding those vendors, finding those solutions, and finding that threat intelligence that manages to draw in the internal resources and leverage those, but also you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Find those that go outside, because when you talk about building out the threat intelligence requirements, identifying this is what we need to have happen, this is what we need it to look like. Well, again, that's only as effective as, well, are you addressing it? Have you tailored it? Have you avoided those red herrings? Did you fall for the trap of, while watching the movie, assuming that the first nefarious looking, shadowy, hacker-esque thing to come across was obviously the killer? It was obvious, but at the same time, overlooking the fact that, well, with social engineering and privilege escalation from accounts, as Twitter learned the hard way, Is it the teenager sitting in their parents' house, their basement, that's trying to build up their credentials? So who are you getting within the organization to build out the requirements for what you're looking for? Is it the security operations? Yes, they absolutely should. But keep in mind, the threat intelligence that's being distilled, the decisions that are being made, aren't just the security operations team. You also have the business units. You also have the C-suite, the board of directors. They're driving all these other aspects of the business risk. So have you pulled in for them, have you pulled in what they're doing, but also the vulnerability management aspects? Because as we talked about before, just because there are vulnerabilities in a system doesn't mean that they're being exploited, that most vulnerabilities aren't, that there are some certain ones that are more often than not, and patching it in are based on incoming threat intelligence. Are you able to distill that, yes, we didn't patch something because of a business decision here, but because of that, all this other malware, all this other threats are building off of that one unpatched system rather than something new and novel. So do we need to reprioritize? And that protocols, those requirements are built on the input, threat intelligence, the information that you're building from all of these different teams. So it becomes critical to have that buy-in, both on who's contributing to the requirements, but also who's going to implement them. Because one of the big issues that you'll see is, okay, we had a fancy gate, but nobody drove down that driveway. Everyone did something different. So are you, making sure to go back? Are you training the staff? Are you working with the staff to remind them of the issues with credentials so that they are hardened against or better prepared for the social engineering? Business email compromise continues to be one of the recurring threat vectors, and training and going back to those basics to say, hey, we've received some intelligence, we've seen trends in the industry that this is happening, but does the staff, does the team, does the company know what to do with that information? Do they have time to implement the new processes? Do they have the funding? And are you addressing that? Are you communicating the importance of it based on what you've been able to pull from your threat intelligence? But again, going back to one of the other issues that SANS saw was a lack of management buy-in. At 30%, a third of all the respondents said both, we don't have the capabilities to integrate them, but we also don't have a management buy-in. So what tools can you pull from your threat intelligence, from your information that's coming in to convey that risk, to convey the importance of? And another thing to keep in mind here is also 47, almost 48% of the respondents cited a lack of automation. Because as we'll see, one of the keys is, have we made this easy? Have we taken those steps to maximize our time and resources by automating? Because that takes some of the decision off of that, avoids or that minimizes the potential to go down the rabbit hole if the system itself has become automated. And one of the things that also plays into that is, for our IBM saw in the cost of data breach, that, and if you haven't noticed, the themes that keep popping up are the incident response testing. That helps cut down on your costs, that the business continuity, but also the formation of the IR team. So having a team that can go in and build out based on the information that was received, based on the different processes that have been put in place, based on all these different things, Have you been able to build out that automated platform? Because that was also one of the top contributors to minimizing the costs and the data breach, is if you have the red team testing, as well as the employee training. And yes, extensive encryption, always going to be helpful, but do you have the analytics? Are you able to process the information that you're pulling in? Because again, that's going to help in tailoring it to your industry. If you're in the healthcare industry, how have you prioritized it? You are able to do so because you've partnered with those threat intelligence sources and been able to overlay them against, well, quite frankly, what your team has, your processes. And the other thing to look at is by not having the properly trained staff, by not having by having these complex systems without that automated aspect, what IBM showed is that in itself starts to build out and really impact quite the opposite way. So that's why it starts to build and add on to the cost. So when we talk about the mitigation, the threat intel sharing, that helps again mitigate that. Being able to see what's going on in your industry, see what threats are coming in to the healthcare industry, and identifying, oh, there's a bunch of ransomware attacks that are exploiting certain vulnerabilities, that that these types of the threat actors are using these forms of attack, these attack threat surface, that this is how they're getting in, this is how they're reaching in. Well, if 3 other hospitals have also been impacted by this, then probably we should take a look at it. Because you have that intel sharing, because you have that threat intelligence, you're able to avoid, well, all right, do I need to worry about this? Do I need to worry about that? It enables you to prioritize, but that automated system also allows you to be able to push it out without having to put additional drain on resources. Because again, we're talking about being able to distill through the automation, having a platform, having a partner, having some of these policies and procedures built in, and the testing, being able to test against different scenarios. Again, that's where you see the tabletop gaming, where you see the red teams coming in and, well, let's poke these holes. And you don't have to have these extensive red team operations. There are ways to minimize that. Identify, do we need, as I said, with the breach response we dealt with before, we knew we didn't need to have extensive pen tests on all of our systems. Why? Because, well, quite frankly, we knew where the vulnerabilities were everywhere. We knew which systems were particularly vulnerable. They're the ones that had been breached. They're the ones that we were having to rebuild. And by poking through and identifying, it allowed us to prioritize. It allows us to maximize our resources. It allows us to maximize our response. It allowed us to maximize our resiliency. Because once we started identifying, okay, this is how the different threat actors, once we had that information, we were able to, again, pull away from, all right, we know that the likelihood of this attack vector being leveraged is small. But we do know that we need to up our testing game, or we need to up our tools and our teams, because our testing did that. Because by putting in that automation side, we're able to see as well, automating part of the testing, running those, because one and done. In that case, with that particular responsibility and role that I had, coming in and doing a pen test once would only give us that snapshot, would only tell us, well, yes, but as we were rebuilding our systems, what happens then? What happens now? What happens when a new vulnerability is disclosed? Because of our threat intel sharing partnership that we had, because of participating in an ISAC, we were able to receive information coming in, so we know, ooh, this is a new vulnerability that's getting exploited in the wild. All right, we've received that information, we've been able to distill it, we've been able to test, see that yes, we're vulnerable against it. But that way we can then prioritize and leverage our tools and our teams to better respond. Because we saw who gets left holding the bag on those. Again, it's the CISO who's going to be blamed. So have you had those conversations? Have you pointed out, have you highlighted and shown that through this threat intelligence information, we've been able to prioritize, we've been able to form a plan. We know that the plan works, or if it doesn't, where it's going to drop. We've been able to identify what information, how do we spend X amount of resources, time and energy of our budget fighting against this one threat when we've identified that its actual impact on our operations and its actual impact on, did it hit our customers' PII? Did it hit our intellectual property? Or will it cause an annoyance? But we've built these redundancies. It allows you to prioritize all of that and build out much more resilient systems, again, because you've had those tools and because you've had those teams. At least that seems to be the case with IBM's research, with Verizon's research, that building out and taking that threat intelligence, building out the AI platforms, the automation, building out the testing, knowing where those holes are, and building out the tools and the teams permit you to be able to dodge those risk rabbit holes, permit you to avoid those red herrings of such, and allows you, in this case, if you're Twitter, to go build out and identify that, all right, maybe we need to be aware of what different threat actors are doing, because hyperbole aside, there is a lot going on, a lot of information that's communicated. But at the same time, if our basic employees don't have the training, if we haven't looked at our internal systems so we know how to address the privilege escalations, have we crafted those policies, then we tend to go down the rabbit holes and the red herrings and miss really who it is that is costing more to the business and taking more of our budget without the impact. So with that, Ed, I welcome everyone back. I'll stop the screen share and really open it up if
So I have some questions here.
Excellent.
The first one, and I'll leave Wendy's question for last, because Wendy's always asking stuff. This is one of your slides. Talked about the SANS cyber threat intelligence, and it said that 61% companies are using external partners, right?
Yes.
And so here's my question, right? How do you work with these clients to make sure that this solution, cyber threat intelligence, it's good, because you have to deal with cultural adjustments, correct? I mean, it's not a single plug and play. You have to deal with culture, and a lot of the stuff there was cultural based. And you also have to take into consideration third-party risks. Now you have a third party that has very sensitive information about your company that can be, very deadly. Let's say.
Oh, exactly.
So how do the end companies deal with this if they're moving in that direction to outsourcing all of this?
Well, and it's not straight outsourcing. It's a combination of, and by going with that internal external model, it allows you to not put as much of a heavy weight on the external. So you're not sending it solely outside the company, but it still gives perspective to your team, because the internal team, because it allows you to see the trends, the industry experts, but it also permits you to segment out the information and allocate some of the risk. But it further enables some of the companies I've worked with don't have, when we talk about the internal team, that's a fancy way of saying two people, who are responsible for everything. And they can't. And as we saw, it's expensive, both from a business risk as well as the security risk. So, all this information got out. Okay. But it also means by the time we get done dealing with the breach response and everything else, we no longer exist as a company, yet we were providing great services or filling a need. So it gets interesting.
Yeah. All right. Question from Wendy. It sounds like training, internal resources, and automation are all really expensive. Yes.
Yes.
What's the bare minimum that an organization should be doing for due diligence, in your opinion?
Well, it's finding ways to don't reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and finding ways to maximize and leverage. So when we say, okay, training, all right, how big is the organization? Assessing how do we tailor this in? What kind of information as an organization do we have access to? What information or what systems are we using? What is our attack surface? And so using that threat intelligence to help prioritize will then help you kind of take it that next step further of, we're an office of 6. We all work remote. Well, we just that just expanded your attack surface, didn't expand your budget. And so, but do I need to have training on physical security threats if I'm not in a physical environment? So really being able to go through, and Verizon did a great job as they continue to each year, they put out this resource for free. So if you're a company with limited budgets, and even if not, if you have the biggest budgets in the world, still take the time, someone on your team, go and assess, where are the trends? Where are things shifting? And look at Verizon's report, see what's happening in your industry and see where the breaches are, because you'll see some shifts over time, but they're not as significant, and you can get that ebb and flow to understand, okay, if the information we have is of this nature, then it's financial data, it's PII. All right, let's allocate the resources here. And not everybody needs to have the Ferrari if you're driving over dirt roads. And that's where you can learn to leverage the different, again, free resources, as well as some of the automated stuff to help decipher and distill. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say building a zero trust environment to start from. Hat tip to Wendy and stuff, but understanding your risk based on that intelligence.
Okay. In your presentation as well, the impact of 25 key factors, that was pretty telling. And we start with the top 3: incident response, business continuity, and formation of an IR team. Those top three were the highest mitigation, right? Cost. Can you explain a little bit more on that? Because they were, I mean, you have to add up all those three numbers to get, you make this investment, or is that the savings? I didn't understand that.
And really that's a plug for the agenda you've built out with Tactical Edge. Because what you're doing is you're saying, all right, if the average cost of a breach that is in the millions of dollars, if you're able to then, have just one of those, having that IR team that's ready to deploy, or it doesn't have to be internal, but knowing who to go to immediately starts moving the needle on the cost more in your favor. It starts bringing it down. Yeah. That having those automated systems, having something to do so that you can start, you've done some of this testing, you've got some of the prevention as well as prioritization, having that in place, that again moves it a little bit. I mean, every breach is, every breach is different and special and shiny, and it's a pain in the bottom one way or the other, but it's all about, and it's going to happen. Even when Apple is developing their latest technology, somebody leaves a prototype in a bar. Like you can't plan for everything. It's really about how do you take what you have and maximize where you're putting it so that you can minimize that risk.
Okay, as part of your organization, you mentioned the some of the reports, and Tony Cole was referring to a lot of free reports, right? Industry reports that all C-levels, CISOs should be watching or reading. And I forgot, I think it was the Verizon report that said that they've seen a lot of increase on cloud-based attacks. And again, that was before pre-COVID, right? And now COVID, it's remote workforce, and in fact, in the impact of 25 key factors, remote workforce was the most impacting one on the negative side, right?
It does. Because if you think about it, and that makes sense. And that's even before we're going into the working from home. Exactly. If we're just talking, if people are working remotely, they're used to, maybe they've been working, you've got a bunch of developers that they don't need to be in the office, or salespeople. They don't need to be, they're used to it, they're old hat at this. But for every one of those, for every device and network they're connecting in, that's one more attack surface. Now add in that you've got attack surfaces that I'm used to having the protections of, I have my work laptop, it stays in my office is locked at the end of the day. I'm connecting through the approved servers. I'm not using my devices at Starbucks. But even now, you can't get to Starbucks. So that doesn't even help. I'm not connecting from the free Wi-Fi in my apartment complex or my community center. Each one of those, exactly. Or the waiting room at the doctor's office. And so from healthcare, looking at that particularly, you've got all these factors that didn't go in that it would be really interesting to see how the 2021 Verizon, if as much as I say, oh, you only see typically a 10% shift or 4% shift here or there, kind of what COVID kind of just like drops them, just boom, like COVID, seeing that big shift. And so I don't envy, that's part of what we work with our partners, is helping them to feel like you don't need all this. Let's, and building those trust relationships too with vendors. I think a lot of different salespeople get a bad rap, but building that and learning how to distill through some of that kind of the flash and being armed with the free resources is great. Just say, why are you trying to sell me this? I don't need this.
I don't need it. Exactly.
But tell me about this other. Exactly. Exactly. Like suddenly you're my best friend because it's the end of the month, end of the quarter. No. Talk to me again in a couple weeks.
Yeah. So Dr. Pablo Brewer, a good friend of yours, a good friend of mine, is coming on next. And his presentation is about research, right? About SOC burnout and stuff like that. So now we're talking about threat intelligence, that someone is going to be looking at it. Someone is going to be analyzing it, and most probably it's going to be the people in the SOC. So
it is, as we saw. I mean, that's the largest portion of having an impact on creating those policies and those decisions. So, yeah.
So how do you bring in a new tool, introduce a new tool like this one, that it's, you know, it's useful, but now it's going to put more work on another part of your team? I mean, and that's what I meant about the culture stuff.
Well, and that's part of why you have to take the conversations to the higher level. So hopefully one of the things that, and especially with the resources I've linked, really arming the, be it the VP level, the participants who are from those different stakeholders within the organization. How do you have those conversations with them? Bring in, because while the SOC is having to deal with all of it, they're not the frontline vulnerability. So have that conversation, bring them in, because and again, looking at, the CEO is driving a lot of the ultimate decisions, but when things go south, it's the CISO who gets held responsible. So building out that communication and having each team involved, and also getting access to that information so that they can prioritize is really becomes key. Again, easier when it's that hypothetical 6-person company as opposed to 6 divisions under one, waterfall thing. So,
and one last question, and hopefully you can answer. Maybe this is a George question for Friday. George Ortiz will be our closing guy, but you're here. So if you put your, you look at your crystal ball from sight, and you're seeing a lot of information coming in. Where do you think it's coming up the next, let's say not vulnerability, but the next type of threat coming from? Can you see it? Is that something that you can share?
Well, no, I mean, one of the things, and absolutely, check out both George's presentation. He also does what he calls Threat Thursdays, where he's going to tie some of that into the stuff he's going to be talking about for Tactical Edge. So you have those threats, but what we see consistently, business email compromise. It's still continuing, and training employees and making sure they understand, because with the Scythe platform, you get to basically create and detonate your own malware campaigns, which I have to admit, when I'm creating mine, I was like, let's send it in an email. Let's do that, because that's where most of the breaches. I mean, the FBI has warned, CISA, everyone's warning, like, train the employees, get them here. As we saw with Twitter, again, you have all this fancy. Because we see these industry trends, this still remains one of the first, and that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easy. That doesn't take a lot of budget and time. It's just reminding and really working with your team.
Okay, perfect. Salma, you're on mute.
I didn't do it. But anyway, thank you again. And I hope everyone enjoyed it. And the resources, like I said, I'll have available and happy to answer questions later.
Thank you so much, Luis, for your amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
I tell you, Salma is going to be an expert. I want to see if I can hire her at the end of this week. She's absorbing all this information like a sponge. But we all want to find someone like her, like, her very wide available mind just so
It'd be
Liz,
really
again,
interesting, really.
yeah,
For
Thank
me,
you.
so
it was really good.
everything is new, but it's really interesting. I'm learning a lot, really.
And your
But I don't
donkey,
want any exam, please, Ed. I don't need that.
all right, Liz, thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so
Say
much,
goodbye to the
Liz.
doggy. He was very quiet. He was a perfect little puppy.
I may have threatened him a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Not really. I bribed him.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Liz. Thank you very much.